have a wonderful speaker this evening, Jody Long. Jody and her husband have been involved in primarily in the early years, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, Jody, but primarily initially were focused on near-death experiences. And I would like to take a moment to give my thanks to Jody. When I was first experiencing challenges with my Christian faith, trying to find something that I could rebuild a spiritual foundation on. I read Raymond Moody's book and Life After Life, and I thought, well, maybe near-death experiences is where I ought to put some attention. And I don't remember how I came across it, but the NDERF website, Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, that Jody and her husband created, came to my attention. And I was just fascinated by what I could find there. And I probably over the space of, 4 to 6 months, read maybe 2,000 near-death accounts. So Jody, I have to say that you had a fairly significant impact on the early stages of my spiritual growth and the path that I've been on. So thank you. You probably hear this from a lot of people, but it doesn't hurt to hear it from new people.
Well, thank you, Jim. It's nice to be here, and I'm glad everybody showed up here. It's wonderful. I haven't actually been in a Zoom meeting like this before, so I'm fascinated by watching all the people and all the pictures. So thanks for inviting me.
Mm-hmm. So let me pose a question to you. How did you first learn about near-death experiences? We'll talk about some of the other things you do, like after-death communications, but
okay. How
did near-death experiences first come across your awareness?
Well, it first came across like in 1999 when I met Jeff. We went on a date and he says, well, I do NDE. And I'm like looking at him like he's got a hole in his head. I'm like going, okay, well, I like meditation. I like these things, but I've never heard of NDE, never. And so we had our first date was talking about NDE.
And let's just let everybody know that your husband is a physician.
That's true. Jeffrey Long, he's written Evidence of the Afterlife and then Evidence of God. And he's also a radiation oncologist. So he's very active in this NDE arena. So
his interest, it sounds like it was like was it Ken Ring calls it a virus, a benign virus. It sounds like your husband gave you this interest through his fascination with the subject.
Well, but it wasn't for a while. It was when I took over the website a couple years later. And then after that, I said, oh, now I see what he's talking about. Before I just let him just talk and do his own thing. But, after a while, once you start working on the websites, it's like, oh, wow, because you're processing data and you're reading these experiences and you're not just seeing them from the NDE perspective. Everybody submits on a questionnaire form. And then he goes in and categorizes them. And then we may get the out-of-body experience. We may get the after-death communication. And when you get all that kind of information, you actually, when you see the NDE, it takes on a different flavor because you see how it's related to everything else that happens. It's a different type of phenomena than anything else. And it's probably the strongest one if you're trying to prove an afterlife or if you're trying to prove anything that has to do with consciousness. It's just the absolute strongest one. And that's why when you read any kind of, like journal, or when people do science and they want to report on something, like the mouse brain, the rat brain, the one that they were talking about how the rat brain mimicked NDE because there was this flash right before it died, this little spark of consciousness. Oh, that's the NDE, and you're like, no, we're not rats, So, no. But everybody's always trying to compare it to NDE because that's what gets published.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask Mark to take a moment and put in the chat the NDERF website address. The website itself, I've found you've made improvements to it over the years. And one thing that I really enjoyed was when you want to read about an experience, you have these exceptional experiences. Is that something where are you reading every one of these things, and then are you making a judgment call and saying, hey, this is interesting enough, let's make this an exceptional one?
Well, it's not just the idea of interest. A lot of things is when it's exceptional, it's a teaching tool, because there are so many different aspects to the near-death experience. It's like do you remember like in the 1970s, they had those those globes, and they spun around at the disco.
Disco globe.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of what the different aspects remind me of. I mean, each little piece of it reflects a little part of the NDE, and by the time you get everybody together, you've got this really very broad spectrumed idea. So you're not only getting things that have to do with like for instance the NDE itself and the elements, but you have this human flavor of everybody and what they can experience. Because personally, I believe that the NDE is a experience that is sort of like it's a co-created experience, and that it is in between. It's not quite heaven, even though a lot of people say they feel like it's heaven. I think there's a lot of give and take in there as far as being able to learn things in that particular state of consciousness. And when they're learning these things, it's kind of a co-created experience. What's going to help this person the most in their spiritual growth on Earth? And then also, if there's any kind of a message from the other side, or anything that they need to know about, or that may affect this life. So you've got this kind of push and pull that the experience gives you.
So you use the word co-created.
Mm-hmm.
That means that there's more than one individual, or more than one consciousness, or more than one source, maybe working to create a particular NDE, right? So are you saying that maybe there's an aspect of yourself that is associated with you, but it's not it's both Jim Fisher's beliefs coming in and having an influence on it, but then there's another aspect somehow of Jim Fisher that's having an influence on it as well. Could be a relative or something, but
it could, or it could be your higher self.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I like that. With all the NDEs I've read, I would agree with your take. You can't read one NDE and say, okay, that's what it's like. It really helps to read all these because they're so varied. When you read a lot of them, you get it's like you said, that disco ball. There's so many facets to it that each person who's had an NDE is adding something to that globe. It's getting bigger and bigger, and the light it reflects is brighter and brighter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how the process. People are they come on, they want to tell their story. So you mentioned earlier there's a forum. Tell us a little bit about how that process works.
Well, Jeff is the science guy, so he created the forum back in 1999, and what he did was he had questions of his own. He'd read, like for instance, Raymond Moody's book, and he said, this, and he'd read some stuff in a medical journal, and when he was in residence, and he says, hey, if this is really true, then I want to study this. And so he studies it, and he says, okay, now I have some questions. I have some things I want to find out, because when you just read a book, most of the time authors are looking for similarities. And so you're going to see a fairly homogenized group of experiences that say one thing. I mean, that's just the way that those types of books go. But when you study them, you get the flavor from everybody, and you get them from different countries, all different ethnicities, all different races, all different socioeconomic, all different ages. I mean, we are talking about a global input of this experience. And it's just beautiful to see that most of them all have certain types of familiarities, a bit, like certain elements, but they also have their own unique flavor because it's their experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd point out to people that, as Jody has said, these come from around the world. So sometimes people are submitting these things in foreign languages. And Jody has a cadre of translators to help put this in English. So you can read things from China, from Iran, from Turkey, from, I don't know, you probably have some from Africa.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Nigeria.
Yeah.
We've got several from there. And I don't know if you count, a lot of people, we have a lot from South Africa, and one from the Congo. So yeah, we're starting to make inroads into there.
So here's a question for you. You know who Jan Holden is?
Oh yeah.
She's the current president of IANS and has been engaged in, for people that may not know her, she's been engaged in NDE research at University of Texas for many years. And they wrote a book called The Handbook of Near-Death Experiences, which summarized, this is probably came out, I don't know, 8 years ago, but it summarized the status.
It's a big sucker.
Yeah, it was. And one of the things I found interesting was that, and I'd like you to maybe comment based on your readings of things that have been submitted to NDERF. Culture has an impact on the experience. So if you're from maybe a Christian background, you might experience, not necessarily, but you might experience a Christian aspect of things. If you have a Muslim upbringing, you're probably not going to meet Jesus, but you might have aspects of your NDE that are related to the Muslim faith. The way you're looking at, I'm not sure you agree with that.
Well, I didn't used to agree to it, but I have read some science that backs whatever the study was, but I haven't actually dug into the study enough to just really sit down and parse it. But what I think happens is that they will meet the person on the other side that can help them grow the most. And one of the things, is it actually Jesus? Well, it all depends on how you look at it, because, we are all a part of God. So yeah, you can say, yes, it is. Or if you want to get really specific, is it the Jesus? Who really knows? Yeah. Because you can't really, but I think that a lot of the NDEers, the way that they talk about it, yeah, I think they do meet Jesus, but a lot of them, it could be their guardian angel. Since it's a co-created experience, we actually have some that I have a tendency to believe may actually be the answer. And they will say, well, how do you want me to present to you? How do you want to see me? What makes you most comfortable?
Yeah.
And they'll say, okay, well, give me Jesus, and that's what happens,
Or said another way, on the other side, there's an awareness of what you need. So they may make it, instead of giving you the option for how they present themselves, they may know. And I read recently an out-of-body book by Jürgen Ziwe. A couple had died in a boating accident, and when he was on his out-of-body state, he came into this room where these two individuals appeared to be unconscious. They were wet, covered with seaweed, and he asked the people who were attending to them, what am I seeing here? And they explained to him, these two individuals died in a boating accident. And rather than have them just all of a sudden be aware that they died in the accident, we're easing them into the awareness that they died. So when they come to, they're going to see they're wet and that there's seaweed there, and they might think they've been rescued. And so that's an easier transition than to all of a sudden have to confront that you died. And we will then take them from that frame of mind into an awareness that they actually died. But it's they're an awareness of what these two individuals needed, and they were managing the process.
Mm-hmm. And you see that a lot too. So it's the other side. It's not. You can say some generalities about the other side, but as far as specifics, I'm not sure you can actually go there, because you're dealing with somebody's mental processes and their emotional processes as well. One of the things that I thought was interesting is that a lot of times when people are speaking, okay, like you get back to that cultural thing. Now, one of the things that I've always wondered about is some of them are really, really super Christian. And then I get people who write in and say, you shouldn't be posting things that are religious. And I kind of go, well, let's look at it a different way, because have you guys ever watched Star Trek? Have you ever seen that? Anybody?
That's my favorite program.
Yeah? No, serious. I'm a Star Trekkie. I'm a Star Trek. But this is really cool, because there is one part where it was Jean-Luc Picard, and right, he goes down, and it's enemy mine, and he's down there, and he's trying to sit there, and he's talking to this. He's on the planet, and he's talking to this big lizard guy, and the part that is so relevant about it is he's saying, okay, now I've got this. He says, I can't understand you. And they keep talking, and they're talking around each other. They can't understand each other. They're doing these pantomimes. But in the end, this guy was talking about using metaphors. That is what they spoke as. And in my mind, that's sort of how I relate this to, is because they can speak. A lot of times when they're over there, a lot of Christians are they've got their own language. Especially the fundamentalist ones, they've got their own language, and they can speak. It's like they speak to each other from a different language, just like that lizard guy was trying to use metaphors. And just because they're speaking in a different language doesn't invalidate the NDE. Yeah. They're trying to communicate it to you, and that's the only language that they know. So they will speak Bible verse, And so that doesn't invalidate the experience. The experience happened. And so, yes, I will post those things because it's a valid experience.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges we as humans have is we're trying to understand something that is outside the scope of our experience. And we have a tendency to try to distill it into what our human experiences are, as opposed to saying, I need to suspend my human understanding of things and try to think of it from a spiritual perspective. I've made it through third grade, and now I'm in fourth grade. I can't try to understand what I'm being taught in fourth grade if I only, think on a third grade level. I have to open up and be, more receptive to all the different ways that people experience that state.
Well, but not only, okay, let's just say that you experience something that is so far out there that you can't, there's no time, everything happens simultaneously. You're feeling things that other people cannot, that other people could not relate to, or you're doing synesthesia, which is like, for instance, you can see colors. Not see colors, but see sounds, things that cross over with your senses. And so when people are going through these things, you've got to figure out, okay, now, if I want to communicate this to people here on Earth, if I want to talk to them about it, how are you going to do it? And then you have to take and you have to order it. And then you have to take and then you have to bring that sentence down to a probably more like you know, trying to say, well, it was like this, or it was sort of like that. You know, love is like between parent and child. You know, I mean, they try to describe it in earthly terms as best as they can, but it's something that's still totally different. So they're trying to communicate it, they're trying to order it, they're trying to put things into words that are just almost impossible to do. And so how is that going to come out? And a lot of times people will use things that are familiar to them. And so that's just the idea of what NDEs have to go through to be able to get that experience to us so that you can read it on, you know, like our website.
How about negative NDEs? I assume you have a collection of NDEs that are, or negative experiences.
Okay. You know, one of the media loves to talk about negative NDEs, especially around October 31st. So anyway, when you're trying to look at a phenomena, what you're trying to do is you're trying to find things that fall within the bell-shaped curve. And the negative NDEs are definitely on the fringe. And there's only like between 2 and 5%. And are they NDEs? Well, it sort of depends on what definition of NDE you use. Oh, I'm sorry. Jeff, did you go? We're in the hotel. Okay, this is sort of embarrassing, but we are in the hotel, and Jeff said for the gal to come over and fix the bed, right? And so nothing to do with NDE, but everything to do with this talk. And they always come when you're talking. Sure. So anyways, back to the good stuff.
We had somebody that a few weeks ago, I'm drawing a blank on her name, but she had a challenging NDE. But she was able to recognize, she said, I came from a Catholic upbringing that taught that we had to go through a purgatory. So she carried that belief with her, and that's what she says she experienced. But then she came to a realization that she didn't need to stay in that environment. And she then sought a higher vibration level. So I liked hearing her story because the message I got from that is things aren't necessarily just imposed on people. If you take the time to learn about near-death experiences and you hear stories like that, then you can, when you finally do cross over, perhaps you're more informed. And if whatever environment that you find yourself in, if you're informed, you can decide, hey, I'm happy with this, or I'm not comfortable with this. You can decide to move along and do something different. Apparently we have some, it's not just dumped on us. You have some ability, if you're informed, to have an impact on it.
Yeah. Another thing I was going to tell you about that, the negative NDEs, one of the things about those is, I don't know, are you familiar with the ICU experiences?
Yeah.
Yeah. The ICU experiences, which is the intensive care unit, a lot of times they use pain drugs like morphine. And many times I suspect that a lot of these negative things that they're calling, NDEs, I actually think that they're not. I think that there's some of them you can see where there's a mix-up of like hallucinatory elements, or you can see some, not just the hallucinations, but a lot of them don't make a lot of sense. They jump around. you know, and so I have a tendency to wonder if they really are negative NDEs, just because that's, and another thing is, I'm trying to think, let me see. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. We're getting there. Jeffrey, please shut the door. We were part of the hurricane, guys, and I would much rather be at home than here. But it looks like we'll be here between 2 and 3 weeks, and it hit us dead on. You know, we're part of the HOMA group, and it's been a really hard transition to move from HOMA to Houston. So anyways, I really am very, very sorry for that. I am trying to, okay, so go ahead.
So there are other aspects of your website. The after death communications, was that something, I think you've got a separate section or a separate URL for after death communication?
Yes, we do. And I'm not sure if we define after death communication a little differently than other people. We are looking for the idea that after people will be able to see the, for instance, the way that we look at it, we're looking at just the one type of after death communication. We don't get into the like the mediumship. And so we're trying to keep it just to a certain type of communication, after death communication. So, but what we do find is a lot of what people write to us about the after death communication is they will tell us that one of the things, I did some research on it, and like about, I believe it was like 33% were like blood relatives, which I thought was actually fairly high. That was an interesting thing to find out. And another thing, what else did I find out? A lot of times you'll see that this type of phenomena, they act the person that they meet or they hear from the other side, a lot of times, you know, like in the NDE, they're the greeters, the people on the other side. Whereas in the after death communication, it's usually somebody trying to tell another person something. And it may be, I'm here, everything's fine. It may be, I'm sorry, you know, making amends. And it's a little bit different. And it can be just as a confirmation that they made it to the other side. And it can be as simple as a light bulb flicking out. And coming back on, you know, and they say, oh, okay, well, that was Aunt Bessie, you know. And so it's a different type of phenomenon, but what's cool about it is you can take from our website, you can take from everything like the STEs, the spiritually transformative events, you know, and the waking visions, the precognition, and, you know, all these different things that they have on the other side is the spontaneous OBEs and the just regular OBEs, or there's so many things that they want to call paranormal, but I actually think it's just another step in consciousness. I think that it's actually very normal. And so you can take that section and then you can take and go, okay, now the NDE represents between that paranormal and the NDE, you know, the paranormal, and then with the death experience, it's a temporary death, and then because they come back, and then you've got the after death communication, and then that's the yes, they've made it and they're talking to you. So it's very interesting to see this spectrum of consciousness, and they're all normal experiences.
Yeah, I think what seems paranormal may someday be viewed as being normal.
Well, would you like to have a talk? Because what is really cool, okay, I've been working with several people, and this is what I get really excited about, because when you work with people that have big data experience. I finally managed to get our 20,000 experiences, from that we've collected over like for over 20 years, and got them all put into a database where you can actually search it. Now, what are you going to find? And I'm not talking about just the stuff we put on the website. I'm talking about all of it. Will you find that some of it's just baloney? Will you find that some of it is just totally freaking mind-blowing? And what happens if you put these into you start making acceptable names, like if you can put definitions, because we don't really have even an acceptable definition, or I should say universally acceptable definition of near-death experience. What happens if you start seeing these experiences and then looking and classifying them and putting them into these certain things in classifications, and then you start looking at the spectrum of experiences? What happens to consciousness? Does that mean that you can actually have like a paradigm shift, because you're no longer looking at things and living in a certain, thinking that these are paranormal, that's just for crazy people? You are actually saying these are normal people. These things are really happening, and we are something much greater than ourselves. What happens to our paradigm shift if we're able to do that? You think about NDE, number one thing, love. It's all about love. Now, what would happen if you can take and move the consciousness of humankind, take and move that paradigm shift and say, look, this is normal. We are a people of love. It really does have a lot of really exciting things if you can get all of it to pull together. And that's kind of what my pet project is I'm going to be working on. So trying to get that kind of stuff going.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting when I look back at my journey from about the year 2001, and you go back even earlier than that, the awareness of these things has grown considerably. Could you imagine having a program on Netflix called Surviving Death 5 years ago? Probably that wouldn't have been something that Netflix would invest in. But you watch movies sometimes, and if you're familiar with near-death experiences and other out-of-body experiences, you watch that movie, and I find myself thinking, that person knows. They may not talk about near-death experiences, but the portrayal of things indicates they have an awareness of what near-death experiencers have shared with us. So I think that it's becoming more mainstream, this Bigelow competition. Hopefully, I don't know how he's going to promote that, but it seems like a great opportunity to go up another level in terms of broadening awareness that these things are legitimate things. Let go of the reductive materialist way. I read a study, where did I see it? I can't recall, but there was some research done on new medical students, people who were in interns and in those early stages of they asked them questions like, do you believe that near-death experiences are real? And a surprisingly high percentage of them said yes, which says to me, if the new people coming into the medical profession are more open to this, we won't have to continually have to deal with a majority that seem to think that everything is created by electrochemical things in the brain. So for me, that's uplifting.
I look forward to it. I think that we're going to start seeing. I think that when you look at the mainstream scientists, who are studying astrophysics and and mainstream science and that kind of stuff, you start to see that these people are just, a lot of them are basically atheists, and they cannot accept that there is dualism in the brain, And I'm like going, I've been doing enough studying on this stuff. I'm like going, well, it's pretty obvious. It kind of looks you in the face. I mean, it actually slaps you in the face. You just can't get around it.
So here's a question about your husband's experience. Being a physician, has he had a lot of, over the years, had a lot of pushback telling him that he's all wrong?
Well, would you like to talk to him? I can, I mean, he's right here. But,
well,
so Mr. Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Can you hear him?
I can hear him, yeah.
Okay.
Did he hear,
huh?
Did he hear the question?
I was going to ask him. Jeff, did you hear the question?
No.
Oh, okay. So he wants to know that if you've had any kind of pushback being a doctor studying NDE. Is that right?
Yeah.
More or less?
Have you felt pressure from peers telling you that you shouldn't be doing this type of thing?
Okay.
Yeah.
Pressure from peers?
No. Before I published my first book that became a New York Times bestseller, I was basically in the fringe. I did not share what I was doing with anybody. Even on the website, I was known as Dr. Jeff, and I was not known as the Dr. Long that had the Ender website up for many, many years of its existence. After my book came out, my first one, and it was a New York Times bestseller, all of a sudden I had credibility due to my research and the huge number of media events I had, that pretty much beyond that time, pretty much all doctors, or certainly any healthcare people that would talk with me, had a lot of respect for what I was doing. I've talked to hospital grand rounds and have been very well received in terms of written feedback I've seen that's required for getting continued medical education credits for when I give my talks. So it was, I've been very lucky that I had a book that was so popular that allowed me to have the credibility that doctors in general get. And I think doctors also get unconsciousness and the medical inexplicability of a conscious experience when you're unconscious or clinically dead. I think that helps a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, there he goes.
Well, to me, it's helpful to think that we're more and more people are accepting these things. That the more we see programs, the more we hear accounts, the more openly we can talk about these things. The greater the appreciation. And ultimately, going back to what you said, it's all about love. And to really appreciate that, I think it's helpful to recognize that's where we came from. That we're evolving back to our origins, and we can look at this human existence as being a place where we can learn, we can cultivate our loving capacity. But you first have to have an appreciation that that's the message we're getting from not just near-death experiencers, but a lot of different types of experiences as well.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about after-death communications, and I've found when I travel, I'm on a plane, I will, if I'm sitting next to somebody, I'll pose a question, not a really deep question about paranormal things, but enough so that I can judge the person's interest in the subject. And if they show that they have an interest, I'll go a little deeper. And I find that maybe 25, 30% of the time, we go beyond just an initial question. And quite often, people will share their experiences. And sometimes those experiences haven't been shared with anybody. They're afraid that they'll be judged. I've told this group about the woman I met in California when I was visiting my son and his family. We happened to be at a playground together, and was asking her some run-of-the-mill questions about her grandchild, and And I quickly learned that her son had died in Afghanistan. I lost a brother many years ago, and I know the impact it had on my parents. So people need to talk about those things, and in a place that is secure, they can express themselves. And she told me about his death and the impact it had. And I then posed a question, and I said, have you ever felt as if your son has reached out to you from the other side? And the smile came to her face, and she started telling me about, yes, that he had reached out to her. And for her, my sense was that it was really a wonderful experience for her to be able to talk to somebody who would accept that as being her experience and not try to tell her that it was, some false brain creation. So I think the more people like all of us that are here tonight, we have an appreciation for these things. And the more comfortable we can feel talking about them, we can spread the word, we can spread awareness. It's kind of what we're doing with Consciousness Cafe, bringing people like you on. We want people to understand that this is a normal part of our spiritual selves.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. I was trying to say that I think that one of the things that I've noticed when people have been contacting me lately, and it's interesting trying to do a lot of the work that both Jeff and I do. We answer tons of email, but a lot of times even trying to answer it in foreign languages is actually quite challenging. But people are so grateful when they get somebody that can actually understand them, and they can talk to them, and they can and then they can ask questions. I mean, to them it's like a whole turn in their spiritual direction. It's pretty exciting to see.
Yeah. Well, you and I have been talking now for about 45 minutes, and I would we'll continue with some things, but I'd like to give an opportunity for others to pose questions. And there are two ways that people can do this. If you want to post something in chat, you can put a question in there and I'll read it to Jody. You can also raise your hand. There's if you call up the participant list, I think down at the bottom, you'll see a place where you can raise your hand. And I'll call on you to pose your question. Now we've got a hand raised already. New Year 21, can you tell us, maybe just give us your first name and then go ahead and pose your question.
Jim's Bill Linfesti.
Hey, Bill.
I'm gonna have to change my computer name because nobody knows who it is. I had three questions, actually. Could you first explain what you meant by dualism of the brain?
By dualism, there's like the brain. Okay, for instance, if you're sleeping, it's probably easier to explain it by that because you would understand easier. But the dualism of the brain is when there's the brain itself and the things that happen, like in a dream, things that, for instance, drugs, the brain acts a certain way, and these experiences are generated in the brain. But when the brain actually flips over to the spiritual side, you start seeing something very, very different than if it happens just in the brain. And you start seeing the spiritual side and what the spiritual part of humans are actually is actually capable of.
Okay, that leads into my second question. But first, I was going to make a comment in terms of getting people to be more familiar with this kind of thing. I remember something that happened to me back in about 1980, I guess it was. I was at work, and most people there were women, and they were, all of a sudden, they were started talking about Mendel's gene theory. And I thought, they don't read much. None of them are really scientifically inclined. Why are they discussing Mendel's theory? And it was because on one of the daily soap operas, there was a big conflict, like a big legal battle and stuff about whose child somebody was. And they got into dominant and recessive genes. And I thought, so what you need to do you want to educate people, for women, just work the thing about near-death experiences into maybe a couple of daytime soap operas. And for a lot of men, you could wait till the weekend during football games and put the same kind of thing on, maybe beer and car commercials. But getting back to the dualism theory, and your comment about the intensive care experiences that might be hallucinogenic or hallucinatory instead of really spiritual, are there ways to actually measure by either looking at brain waves or by having somebody who might be sensitive, who can look at maybe auras or something to try to actually empirically measure the quality of the experiences to see if they're actually legitimate or not?
Well, I can tell you that at this point, I probably don't have enough actual data to answer that question. And one of the things that I was trying to do with this, by getting all of the websites together and getting everybody's experiences together, and then putting it onto a database and opening it up so that people can actually study these themselves. And then you'd have like a bulletin board, and people can say, well, maybe this happened or maybe this happened. And then they can start coming to, I guess it's like science by consensus. If you can actually start to get enough people's participation, you might be able to tease out the difference between, for instance, like I use the drug experiences. The difference between when a person, like you'll see they're bombed, they can't function, and then all of a sudden, poof, everything's totally clear. And so there has to be something in between that junction, something in there that can point us towards where does one end and the other start.
How about, you want to comment on the Bruce Grayson scale?
Which
maybe
one?
Another, well, answering Bill's question, it's hard to make a determination at the time that something's happening, because you don't have, necessarily have the equipment to do it, or your focus is on trying to rescue somebody that's in distress. But after the fact, there are Bruce Grayson designed a scale. You pose a lot of questions to a person that's had an experience, and their responses to these questions get rated, and it helps determine, whether it was an NDE and how deep the NDE was. It's a scale, I think, that's been used. I'm not that familiar with it. I couldn't tell you all the questions.
I think it's been used since like the 70s, from what I recall, I think. But it's been a long time, and it's been the most utilized scale. It does have some problems, but at the same time, it has a lot of validity to it. But I'm not sure how you would actually. I'm not sure that. See, your comment with the aura. I mean, that's a good idea, because it's something that a lot of people believe in it, and we know that auras exist. But the thing is, I don't think you'd be able to persuade science with it. They wouldn't consider that valid. So you've got to be able to come to a meeting ground and find something that everybody finds valid.
I had one question. Is it possible, and this is reaching into the future probably, but is it conceivable that your brain is actually changed a little bit from the way it was before the experience to the way it was after the experience? And if we knew how to measure that, I mean, you're trying to use gross material things to prove something that isn't really on a gross material level, but is it conceivable that you could actually quantify or measure the changes by looking at maybe changes in the brain eventually?
I know that they do a lot of MRI stuff, and I don't know if you could get a before and after. I don't know if somebody would be able to do that with a near-death experience. But I think that you could probably do something like, for instance, if the way that I look at it is, and I don't know how you would go about actually proving it, but I think that there is something in the fact that your whole body shuts down. You cannot possibly have a physical brain function. It's not working. You can't think in the brain. You're dead. And so in order to have this experience, you have to be outside of your body. Now, the only way that it interfaces is something interfaces in the brain that allows it to be able to, there's something in there that makes it so that you can remember it. And I had read a book, and I can't remember the fellow's name right now, but it had to do with the evolution of consciousness. And that he suggested that maybe the NDE might be a light bulb moment. And I went, now that's an interesting idea, because if you have enough emotions or perhaps enough light with some of the piezoelectric stuff, but maybe if you have enough light in the brain and it just kind of flashbulb moment, you've got something along the lines of maybe akin to like a PTSD. And a lot of people have suggested it. And that whatever that is, that's what helps people have a memory. And some people, it's deep enough that they not only have a memory, they have a loop. So,
well,
I don't know how it fits into it.
Yeah, there was a guy in, I mentioned him to Jim because Jim was in the same city this guy was in. His name was Philip Kaplow, and he set up a Zen center back in the 60s after being in Japan for, I guess, 20 years. And he said that when he meditated, I guess his alpha wave stuff was off the chart because he could concentrate so well. And I just wondered, maybe over time, as your I guess your spiritual nature develops, and as you sort of, transform into a more evolved person, if maybe your average brainwave stuff is going to change to reflect that, which would be some kind of proof of evolvement. But that's
they get that. Have you read the emotional intelligence?
No.
Or anything that has to. Daniel Goleman is an excellent resource if you are looking for things that have to do with the mental and the brain, and then also taking and being able to see how there's a lot of they do the MRIs with the brain at the same time. And they've got a lot of things that show in the brain how you can overcome things like negative emotions and where these things happen and how you do that kind of stuff. And it may actually be possible that that they would be able to work with NDEers to actually see if there is some kind of a difference. But in order to actually definitively prove it, you would probably have to have a before and after type of comparison, because yes, the person changed, maybe their brain looks similar to another NDEers, but in order to definitively prove it, you would have to have some kind of a baseline from before.
I have a question from Jeanette. I'd like to get her question on the table.
Okay.
I think I know the answer, but I'll let you answer, Jody. It says, how many years of data are you waiting to collect before you're done with your research? And once your research is done, is this data that anyone will have access to by category, for example, NDE, OBE, etc.?
Right now, that's what I'm trying to do. Is I'm trying to open it up so that everybody will have access to the data, but it won't be, it won't have anything to do with, identifying information. But it would have to do with the quality of the information and being able to do your own research. As a matter of fact, I will be releasing probably within the next, if I can ever get to my big computer, I will be able to access and open, I have it linked, but I need to get to the computer to be able to do some things to make it so that you all will be able to do it. But you can type in, we now have a searchable database of the experiences that are on NDERF. And so you can take, and it will give you you'll type like love up here, and it'll just spit out a whole bunch of things with love, and then it will highlight love. And then you can press it, and then you'll have the experience come up here. So it will help a lot of you to be able to do your own determination on what you want to know about or what you want to learn about. And it will open up the field for you so that you'll be able to do your own research.
Yeah, it's not a matter of collecting data. It's a matter of creating a database that is searchable. So it's a technical hurdle as opposed to a capture of information.
We've already got the information. We've got just about every kind of experience you could think of under the sun.
So here's a question that I thought of that when I sometimes want to find an NDE that has a veridical component to it.
Mm-hmm.
Would your future database, if I typed in a search for veridical experience, would it be able to bring forward those that have an element in it that seems to offer some proof that this was a legitimate experience?
Well, when you're dealing with words, a lot of times it's very hard to, like for instance, what you're describing is a scientific concept. And so a lot of people don't know veridical. They have no idea what veridical perception means. And even if you did type it in, you may not get veridical perception because they use different words to express the thing. So, if you did something like out of body experience, you might very well see it.
Yeah. So what that would require, having had a little bit of experience with building databases, you would have to make a subjective, if you were going to create a database that allowed that to happen, you would have to, because the user is not going to, the person who's sending in their story isn't going to say, I had a veridical experience. They wouldn't know what that word meant. But if you wanted to make this...
There is a way to go about it, just in case you want to know. There's actually two of them on the search thing now, because the first one is the one that I was telling you about, where you can search and see just how alike they are, like how many times they mention love, what did they say about love, that kind of stuff. But if you go and you want to veridical perception, you can type it in, and where it will show up is we have like a little snippet area is what I call it, where they have their name and their link, and then they have like a quote there, and then a lot of times Jeff will put in there, he'll say veridical perception, and so that's where you could at least find something of veridical perception.
Yeah, so it sounds like there may be an ability to do that. And
when we start getting this science, we have a website that is or I should say, NDERF has a nonprofit organization, and we're trying to get the science of the NDE, which is our main mission. And by doing that, you'll be able to do that kind of research, and others will say this is veridical perception. So if we have enough people who are involved in the research and have it kind of like we're kind of like crowdsourcing. Isn't that crowdfunding, crowdsourcing? Yeah. But except for it's people sourcing, or like the SETI. What the SETI use people, citizens from all over.
Yeah.
So hopefully do that with consciousness.
Stanley has a question. Stanley, can you unmute yourself? There you go.
Yes. Has there been any efforts to deliberately induce NDEs or out-of-body experiences in your database?
As far as it's unethical to induce an NDE, so people don't do it. And even if they try to do it, the chances are good that, only 15% of the people, depending on who you talk to, it's like 10 to 15% of people who die will have an NDE. And so just because you do something like that, you can't guarantee you're going to have the NDE. Now, as far as inducing OBEs, yes, they do it all the time in meditation in all sorts of ways.
Stanley, I might point you to one particular NDE. Jody, maybe you can refresh my memory on her name. She was a country singer that had brain aneurysm. And the treatment that she had to have was a very specialized treatment. Where that aneurysm was located with a traditional aneurysm surgery would have been way too risky. So she went to Pam Reynolds was her name, Reynolds. She went to a clinic out in the Southwest, and what they did is their approach is to shut the body down. They do that by reducing the body temperature to about, I think it's 60 degrees, and that shuts down the functions in the body. They then, she's on a table, and they tilt the table when her brain is shut down. They stop the heart, they drain the blood from the brain, and they do the repair surgery while she's in this death-like state. So this wasn't something, they didn't do this to try to simulate, see if they could create an NDE. They did it for good medical reasons. And it turns out she had an NDE in the state and could report the things that were going on during her operation, even though the equipment was showing her brain had no brain waves. There's no blood circulating in the body, but yet she was having some kind of conscious experience. So
that one is actually an out-of-body experience. It's not really an NDE. There's some technicalities that make it so that it's not an NDE, just in case you want to know. So that's why a lot of the people from IONS don't use it anymore.
Well, I guess to me, now we're splitting hairs. It's, the idea is that consciousness, going back to duality, if consciousness can exist independently of the body and the brain, then that seems to be pretty good evidence that would indicate there's something more to consciousness than just a function of the brain. So yeah, it's an out of body. If you're going to call it an out of body experience rather than an NDE, that's okay. The focal point is this person.
But I think what I was trying to say is that what that shows is that that's one of the reasons why science is necessary, to be able to have an agreement on what the categories are. That's actually a really good way to show the dialogue between you and I shows that if we could come to some kind of agreement what these types of experiences are, then we would be able to actually draw a diagram of all the different categories of experiences and show where things change, because it may actually be an NDE if people define an NDE a certain way. But since that nobody actually agrees what an NDE actually is, it could be anything from a dream, or Peter Fenwick in his book, sitting down and looking into the fire embers, and he had a NDE because he saw something while he was in this phase, So I think it really helps people to understand, to understand that there are different types of experiences. It doesn't make it bad. Just because it's not an NDE doesn't make it so that, I think a lot of things happen that people say, well, it's an NDE because that's the gold standard. So I experienced an NDE, but what is really important is that they experience something that is unique to them and it's loving to them. And it doesn't really matter what you call it. Scientists can call it whatever they want, but it's to the people, it's the subjective experience. This is something that has totally changed their life, regardless of what a scientist wants to call it.
So you have an existing, in the general population, not everybody shares it, but there's an existing understanding of when you say an NDE, what that means. And what you're suggesting is that that's evolving. Let me give you another example. A friend of mine, many, many years ago, back in the mid 80s, I was working in commercial industrial air conditioning. And I sent one of our technicians out to work on a 440 volt rooftop unit. And when he went out to the unit, he received a massive electrical shock. I didn't know what an NDE was at that time, but I would visit him in the hospital. He survived this thing. And one day he told me that his consciousness left his body. He could look at his body lying on the roof of that building. And somehow he knew it wasn't his time yet. And he came back into his body. So I've always called that a near-death experience. But
I would too.
So what's different than, I guess, and maybe I'm splitting hairs and I don't want to take a lot of time on this, but what's different between Pam Reynolds' experience that says that's not a near-death experience and my friend's experience that we do call a near-death experience?
I think it had to do with the timing of when she had her experience, because there was something about, and I wish I could recall the full story, but it's just back, going back in my brain. It has something to do with the fact that when she had her experience, and most people don't know this because they're, the doctors who do the surgeries know the timing of things. And when she described her experience, it had to do with the technicality. Yes, it does sound like an NDE, but I would have to get back to you on that. And then I could actually just write it to you, in an email and just let you know, just for your own edification. But there is something in there. And so.
Yeah, I recall in Pam Reynolds' experience that there were aspects of it. The triggering event wasn't, I think it was when the saw, she heard the sound of the cranial saw.
Maybe that was it. Yeah.
Kicked her out.
That
they
she
kicked
left
her out
her
of body.
body before she was actually dead.
Yeah.
And that could be too.
Yeah. Let's see. I see, Bill, have you got your hand raised again?
I had a question. It sounds like maybe if you're making a left brain definition of this stuff, and it seems like maybe the way to separate out-of-body experiences from near-death experiences to some degree is the fact that near-death experiences happen. They're beyond our control. The causes are beyond our control, like traffic accidents or any kind of accident. And at least with people who have a lot of their pretty highly developed, some of the outer body experiences can actually be done deliberately. And I was, because I remember reading about guys who are like Tibetan Buddhists who are monks, or some yogis who are really, highly developed. And this is not usually in the West, who would talk about this stuff. And it's like they can pretty much do it at will. I mean, it does take some preparation, but they can actually control it. And so it's not just a random thing out of the blue that just happens to them unexpectedly. And if you're doing research, since you can't predict when the kind of accident that's going to cause a near-death experience is going to happen, perhaps you would try to get hold of some of the people that can generate an out-of-body experience, in a control situation. See, because I would think that regardless of how you classify it, that the experiences are the same, because you're experiencing something that is out of the body, and you're also experiencing something that's greater than we're used to experiencing.
Well, okay, let me just give you a few ideas on that. One of them is that if you're experiencing, you can experience a spontaneous out-of-body experience. So you don't have to direct it with your brain. That's why we have two, we actually have like an out-of-body experience and a spontaneous out-of-body experience. The other thing that makes it different is that we use a definition that has to do with death. There has to be an imminent life-threatening event, death. And the out-of-body experiences don't actually have death. They might come close, and there's like a relative of that called like a fear-death experience, where they actually physically leave their body before they die. And then you have the near-death experience, which they die, and then they have the experience. And does that make any difference? I'm not so sure. I don't know, because there are so many spiritually transformative events or so many out-of-body experiences that actually do come very close to a near-death experience. And we don't know what to classify them as. So we put them as a near-death experience, like a near-death NDE-like experience is what we call them. And so if we can actually start seeing and parsing out what makes an out-of-body experience, what makes an out-of-body different in the regular body, what makes that different than an OBE in a near-death experience? I'd like to know, inquiring minds.
Yeah, here's a thought, Bill, where there are other experiences. If the interest is understanding spiritual nature, we can start parsing down to a very fine level on a specific element, but I'm not sure how much that adds to the overall. We haven't talked about shared death experiences. We haven't talked about nearing death awareness. There are all kinds of transformative experiences that I think collectively that's where we need to be trying to build awareness that we're more than just these physical bodies, and to me, I think it's better to spend time building that general awareness. I got a question, another one from, this is from, let me go back, Judith. Out of body, you see yourself and you're aware of being separated without controlling it. I guess that's a statement. Judith, if you care to unmute and make any further comments, you're welcome to. Jeanette has another question. Have you collected information on people who, in your research, have mistaken alien abduction to an out-of-body experience or vice versa? Went through the whole light and did not remember much after that and not sure what experience they had.
I haven't had them put together like that. I've seen people who have talked about alien abductions. And I've seen people who have talked about near-death experiences that don't remember much when they come back. I haven't actually seen the two together like you're talking about, but as far as I'm concerned, anything is possible. We just don't have enough data. Pauline, did you have something? I see you. I can't tell if you're actually, did you have something to say? Nope.
This is Judith. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I know you asked me about the out-of-body experiences. It was a statement, and I did have 2 out-of-body experiences where I was actually across the room or above my body and aware that I was at a different area spatially, but not being able to control the body at all. It's almost as if my consciousness was in another place, and I could see myself, but yet couldn't control my actions.
Was this something that
that's
you
very
attempted?
common.
Did you attempt to do this, or was it spontaneous?
No, spontaneous.
Okay. There are people who find they can get into an out-of-body state through lucid dreaming. If you can get into a lucid dream state and you have enough presence of mind to build clarity, you can eventually get to a point where you can dissolve, at least the people who do this say you can dissolve the dream state and now be in an out-of-body state. It's kind of an interesting.
The one experience that I had, I levitated above my body. I felt myself actually rising above my body. And I was actually, when that happened, I was almost in a sleep state. And then as soon as I awoke, it's like I felt my body, whatever, my consciousness fall quickly down and connect with my body right away.
Have you read any of Raymond Moody's, or not Raymond, Robert Monroe's books?
No.
The first one, Journeys Out of Body, it sounds like your experience was similar to some of his early experiences. You might find that an interesting read.
Okay, Robert Moody.
Robert Monroe. Robert Monroe, and the book was Journeys Out of Body.
Okay. And I wanted to also ask you, now the near-death experiences, are those the out-of-body, is the difference with the near-death is that you actually enter through, I've heard people say that they go through, they're drawn to a white light or a tunnel, and that they see almost like silhouettes or shadows, that they know who that person is that's meeting them. Is that the difference between the out of body and the near death?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Or were you talking to Jim?
Anybody.
Oh, okay. I would say that the difference, an out-of-body experience can be very similar to a near-death-like experience. And so to try to differentiate, to not if there's no physical compromise, then you can't, then that's where the difference is. And the experience is something that's a little bit different. So I just think it's something that needs more study. Does that answer your question?
Yes, well, kind of. I just was curious. I mean, I know my experiences out of body. I have also had an astral projection type of experience where in a dream state, like you were talking about, Jim, where I actually have had deceased people that were related to me come and get me, and I felt like I was flying far away, and they took me away, but I don't remember anything else after that. So in that case, it was totally different than the other two out-of-body experiences. The two that I experienced were more, I was located in one area. It wasn't like I went off onto and flew off somewhere. I know that sounds strange. Yeah, but that's what happened. And I was wondering, is that more of an astral projection or astral travel?
It seems to me that a lot of people have written about this subject, that the non-earthly realms are so immense, could be infinite in scope. Some people who have an out-of-body experience, it's clear, for example, the friend I talked about, and maybe your experience, your consciousness was temporary, in a short period of time, co-located in the same place that your body was.
Exactly.
But as people get more adept at this, I think sometimes they move into other dimensions. You get into multiverse theory, and are there different universes that our consciousness can transition between? I think there may be a speaker at the IANS conference this week that will be talking about some of that stuff. It's, to me, the reading I've done, it's just fascinating, because the more I read, the more I realize how much I don't know. This isn't something that you can distill down into a few pithy words that says this is what it's all about. There's so much diversity to it that if you like this kind of intellectual challenge, there are a lot of books to read.
I'll start with this Robert Monroe.
Yeah, you could go to the Consciousness Cafe. Are you a member of Consciousness Cafe?
Yes.
There's a library there that we've assembled. That somebody once asked me, can you put together a bibliography of books to read? And so a number of us put down, I think we probably got 50 or 60 books that we've read on different subjects. You might try checking out that those listings over on the Consciousness Cafe site.
Okay. My one out of body experience, it was so shocking to me. I thought really, I thought I was having like a mental breakdown of some sort. I didn't know how to accept it. And so I went and spoke with somebody about it, a psychologist. He said it's due to trauma. And that's why the body was out. My consciousness came outside of my body. But
yeah, you have to be careful when you're seeking professional psychologist or psychiatrist guidance.
Right.
You don't, it's like, I think if you look for someone that has some transpersonal experience, you might find that you'll get a more useful conversation about your experience. If you've had a really difficult experience, an emotionally challenging one, there's an organization called ASSIST. They're ACISTE. Mark, maybe you could put that in the chat room for everybody. They are very knowledgeable, but they're primarily, I think, focused on helping people who are in a traumatic situation.
Right.
So.
Well, it wasn't, it, like I said, I guess each case is somewhat different. But like I said, I've had 3 times this has happened in different ways. And it's almost as if one was in a sleep state, one was in a near sleep state, and the other, I was fully awake. So, it's just interesting to me to see where the mind can travel and how it can separate from the body like that.
Yeah. So does this these experiences you had, do they frighten you at all? Or
at first, the first one, well, the one that when I was sleeping, I didn't understand it because I was still very young when that happened. And it didn't scare me at all. But because I knew the 2 people that came the 2 spirits that came to get me. And so they didn't frighten me at all. The other one, yes, did frighten me when I saw myself across the room because that's why I went to speak to somebody, because I really did not understand what was happening. And then the third time when I went above my body and felt like I was levitating and I was almost like in a sleep state. Then that didn't scare me at all because I knew I was going to come back into my body. So I knew more of what to expect.
The Monroe Institute has out-of-body programs. It's expensive. You go up to a residential setting for a week's time. It might cost, I don't know, $2,400, $2,500 for this, and not everybody can afford that. But it's, if somebody wants to be exploring the subject of out-of-body experiences, and you want to be around other people that share that interest in that subject, it can be a wonderful experience.
Right.
When you get a chance to interact with people who've had these experiences or want to have these experiences, and you feel the excitement of doing this together, I just point that out. I think that the more we share our experiences with one another, the more we can see these things as being just a part of who we are, and not feel necessary to be frightened about them.
Well, I appreciate that. I really do. You're right. I think sharing the experiences are important, helping us to understand exactly what's going on, or at least try to understand.
Jody, do you have a portion of your website that's associated with out-of-body experiences?
Oh, yes. Quite a few.
That's something I think we ought to tell everybody, that if you've had a transformative experience of your own, you can contribute to this database that they are building. Jody and her husband Jeffrey, go to their website. You can find it pretty easy to find forums where you can give a general description of what happened, but then you will also be asked very specific questions that are designed to help with the research that they're conducting.
I'll give you that website. That one they're talking about is oberf.org, which is Out of Body Experience Research Foundation. And then we have another website, which is the After Death Communication. Yeah, that's it. And then the After Death Communication Research Foundation, adcrf.org. And then, of course, we're talking right now about the NDErf.org.
Yeah. Paulina has a question, and it's out there for everybody to see. From your opinion, is it the same place for everyone? I think she's referring to near-death experiences. Are people going to the same place?
That's kind of a hard question. And the reason I say that is because, like the disco ball that I was talking about earlier, I think there are so many different facets of where you can go and what you can be. I think that once you reach a certain dimension, you're looking at infinity, and you can go anywhere and experience just about anything. So I'm not sure if they actually go to the same place. Maybe they go to, maybe it's closer when they have the near-death experience, just because it's not as far removed from this 3D or 4D reality, depending on how depending on what side of the fence you fall on, because some people say that, scientists say 3D, absolutely. And other people are saying we're moving into a 4 or 5 dimension. So, depending on where you fall. But I don't know if you do or not. I think there's so many different possibilities that it's just, you're basically looking at infinity.
Yeah, we said that before, that use that word infinity, that Robert Monroe talks about helping people make their transition. When he was in an out-of-body state, he would run into people who needed assistance. They had died, but they didn't realize they had died. And he would help them along their way. And he described it, one way he described it is there's this super highway with all these exits off it. And he would bring somebody along, and they would see an exit that they liked, and they would disappear. So it was, it's almost like there's an infinite number of experiences that can be had out there, and what you are attracted to is what determines what type of environment you go into. That's a little oversimplification, because I think there's a love component as well, that we don't all have access to all vibrational states. If we haven't cultivated a capacity for love, if we've been self-centered and taken advantage of people, I don't think that you have the same opportunities available to you that somebody who's cultivated a greater capacity for love. Now, that's just a subjective thought on my part from the readings I've done. I can't point to any research. It's just something I would say from the readings I've done. There was something I read recently about this. It was Jürgen Ziewe, now I think about it. He had a question as to where do people go who have been suicide bombers and have killed people? And so he set that intention when he went into an out-of-body experience. And he came to a really dark environment where he observed. I told my mother about this last week, and she's an English teacher, and he said, Jim, this is Dante's Inferno. He saw this individual who was surrounded by all these mutilated bodies that were angry with him for what he had done. And it was a torment that he was going through. He couldn't get out of that environment. So it's, if I write this book, I probably will reference that. If we understand that there are consequences to our behavior, it's not a heaven or hell kind of thing, that this oversimplification that Christianity puts on things, or the other Abrahamic faiths. It's much more complex than that, but there are aspects of things, if you're self-centered and taking advantage of people, you may not have a positive experience. You may need to continue to come back into reincarnation and cultivate a higher vibrational frequency in order to experience something. Now, having said that, you can't say that's the universal truth. I think there are people, there's evidence that we plan the experiences we're going to have. And we have to be very careful. Maybe somebody planned to have an experience as a self-centered individual in order to help somebody else have a lesson to learn. So we really got to be very careful and really shouldn't be judging people's experiences. Sheila, I see you've got your hand. You haven't had a chance to ask a question yet. Do you want to speak up? Sheila, you're muted, so you'll have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I don't have a question per se. I have a couple of comments. I've really enjoyed this discussion, and several of the things that I do involve going to different levels of consciousness. For example, I am a medium. I am an Akashic Records reader, and I also channel now. So when I'm involved in these processes, it's like I know I'm at a different level of consciousness, but it's hard to pinpoint where. When we go to the records, it's important to be in either lower alpha or theta as a brainwave, because that's where the information comes in the best. But we go to places that people never imagined they could go as part of their soul journey, as long as that soul has existed. So, we'll go back to the 13th and 14th century and glean information about something that's happening in their life today. And then we're able to clear away some of that negative energy if it's negative and bring it in if it's positive. So my feeling about this is that if you hit the right vibration, just like Jody said, you're able to go anywhere. and pull information from the cosmic consciousness or from the Akashic records. As far as OBEs and NDEs are concerned, I think, and this is just my personal approach, it's just ideas. I don't feel like everybody else should feel this way, but I do. I think they are part of your own ego. They're created by you. I think they're an extension of your consciousness, and they're at a point perhaps in your life where your mind and body are sort of separated from your soul and spirit. And I think they're meant to be a wake-up call, because a lot of people change their thinking about spirituality after they have one of these occurrences. And I think they're very, very useful. I believe that, they aid us in coming back to communication with who we really are at the soul level and at the spiritual level. And I do think they're important. And I think they're exceptionally important for the people who have them. Yeah. And the people who choose to write about them, most of which do. I mean, they do want everybody else to know about it, which is very, very good. But I'll just reiterate, I think it just depends on which level of consciousness you can get to. And I know Dr. Joe Dispenza, in a lot of his work, he measures his meditators as they go from beta to alpha to theta to delta. And then some of them all the way back up to delta, which is 12 to 20 megahertz or 12 to 20 hertz, which is where Elon Musk stays most of the time. It's a very high level, but he can actually measure that. He has the equipment to measure. And I know we were talking earlier about measuring what happens in the brain, but he can follow people in meditation and measure where they go. So the brain communicates with our consciousness, but a lot of people now think that the memory and a lot of our thoughts, feelings are stored in our morphic field. So not every memory is stored in the brain, I think 5%. And I think the brain accesses what's stored in our morphic field, but
we see that in the near-death experiences when people have, and Jody, maybe you can comment on this, people have a life review. It's like it's all instantaneous. Everything is seen at once. It's hard for us to understand that because our normal way of thinking has to be done serially as opposed to parallel. But in an out-of-body state, you don't have that brain function limitation. I see Bill's got his hand raised, and we're probably getting toward the end of our evening together.
You see people squirming?
No, I have a sense after about an hour and 40 minutes, it's that's a lot of people's attention spans start dropping off. But
darn, I wish I was there.
So, Bill, do you have another question you want to pose?
Yeah, real quick. Well, two things. I remember reading from some Zen Buddhists, and they were talking about the fact that the way you go into an experience affects what you get out of the experience. And they're talking about doing things, what they call no-mindedly. And somebody asked them about, I think this may have been Philip Capello again. They were asking him, or maybe a Catholic priest who had studied Buddhism and practiced it. And they were asking about people like kamikaze pilots in World War II. And did they incur less what we call karmic debt that was negative, or what we think of as negative, if they did things no-mindedly? And I can't remember what his answer was, but I think it does play a part in some of this, because if you're doing it, to save your country, or you think it's to save your country, rather than you're doing it just for greed, does it make a difference? The other thing, and I don't know the answer to that, I'm just bringing it up. The other thing is that I remember reading in some Tibetan Buddhists that were doing out-of-body experiences, and they were talking about, I think they call it the silver cord, or something that whatever connects your your consciousness or your astral self to your physical body, and it stretches. If it's ever severed, then you don't come back. But they were saying that's why you have this feeling of maybe you're outside your body, and all of a sudden you just sort of crash back in, and you sort of hit with a thump, so to speak, because this cord pulls you back. And if it's ever severed, and then you're not coming back. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I remember they were saying.
Okay, well, let me move into just a quick comment about, I think we want to bring the formal part of this to a close. And I want to thank Jody for wonderful sharing of the work that she's doing, building awareness of these websites and how they're contributing to things. I'm thankful for the participation that we've had tonight. Want to share something with everybody. If you visit our consciousness-cafe.com website, we've now put up some information on a new initiative that we want to undertake. We call it Open Spirituality. The idea is to bring together people and have them in a risk-free, safe environment talk about what their spiritual beliefs are. We're not trying to proselytize. We're not trying to tell anybody this is what you have to believe. It's an environment that people can share their experiences, their beliefs, and we can learn from one another in the hearing of all these stories and sharing that goes on. So if you're so inclined, please take a look at the website, and there's a banner that will explain more about open spirituality guidelines. We'll be putting some more information up in the next day or so. We will be setting up a specific event. And the hope is that we can try this out with our Consciousness Cafe friends. And if we're successful and people find that it's a useful experience, we may try expanding it. We might approach IANDS, we might approach the Rhine, we might approach the Monroe Institute and see if they have a similar interest in sharing our perspectives and building awareness of these things. So visit the website if that sounds like it'd be interesting to you. Give us some feedback. If you have questions, pose the questions and keep an eye out for the event that we'll have focused on this. Jody, you have any comments you'd like to make in closing?
This is great. This is the first time I've participated in this kind of a venue, and I enjoy it. I really enjoy it. You great people, great audience. You do such a good job as a host. I mean, it's just really kind of cool to be a part of. It's very nice. So thanks for letting me be here.
That whole open spirituality concept, we all have things to share with one another, and if we value each other, we all grow together.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, we've recorded this. It will be posted on our YouTube channel. So if you have friends that maybe might have an interest in this, feel free to tell them about the recording. And thank you, Jody, for very much. We'll send you a link, as we talked about earlier, to the recording for your purposes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.